everyone. My name is Mahlodi Felicia Ramushi, and welcome to my podcast, which is called Podcast with Mahlodi. On this podcast, we are going to be discussing everything youth. We're going to be discussing the young people's experience in housing, in economics, and in the employment market. So, stay tuned as we'll be discussing a lot and lots of what the youth of today needs to hear, especially with all the insecurities and the uncertainties they come across. The youth encounter so much in uncertainty, not only in their transition into adulthood, but also in finding and making a place at home, as their lives are often defined by frequent migration to secure jobs, it's attending university, so they face grave obstacles in finding adequate housing, it being temporary or more permanent. And a growing number of these young adults are consequently either exposed to the insecurity of living arrangements, or they have to postpone leaving or return to their parents' home, which is currently a well-known thing across all the youth. And so one would ask, why focus on the youth? Exactly, why focus on the youth? In my research or in my study, in my podcast, so the reason I focus on the youth mostly is at the time of the country's transition to democracy, hopes were high for the generation of the children that we know of, and the children especially who were born that time and my 2000s, and today 21 years into democracy, this cohort is coming of age. So they form a particular large of part of the South African population. Just under 50% of the current population are under the age of 25. So it just imagine the whole development that has to occur for the youth. So, and it's just over 20% are between the ages of 15 and 24. So they refer to them as born frees, you know that. And then born into this democratic South Africa that theoretically should have opened up opportunities for all, they are considered a possible democratic dividend, which could help drive growth and reduce dependency ratios. You get? And yet, despite all the promises, all the many promises the government has made, the government still makes of a better life for all, racial, class, and gender inequalities still continue to shape young people's lives, dreams, and opportunities, and especially amongst the poor people, the previously disadvantaged groups, the level of school dropout and the unemployment and the discouraged work seekers are high. And this situation, has led many to also think that young people, the youth in South Africa, as a lost generation, or they need to be diffused. So that's also part of actually exactly why I wanted to discuss. I focused on the youth, because we also find so many we come across so many challenges. So it's also an issue of the transition to adulthood, starting to live independently, just finished tertiary or just finished your studies, and now it's you facing the realities of living independently, which is, amongst the youth of today, it's a struggle. I'm telling you, it's a challenge, because you have so many, like back in the days, they used to have student debts, student loans. We still come across students who have student loans or debts that they have to pay, and they can't get home or car credits, which is a struggle, or which is an issue amongst the youth, as they're seeking for houses, they're seeking for homes to live after completion. Or some people, they don't want to live with parents anymore. They want to start doing their things, actually, especially for those from rural areas. They go to urban areas, and they want to start living a new life, and also the South African government has recognized that young people's transition to a independent or sustainable livelihood can take a relatively long time, which is why the youth has that, they plan it with the stigma that they cannot succeed because it takes time, because the resources takes time to get delivered, and the services and the everything. So it's actually quite a challenge for us, the youth. And also with the current pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic crisis situation, has shed a more lighting on the growing challenge of housing the youth and its effect, and being both prone to live in overcrowded homes and priced out of the urban housing market makes a plea for directed action a pressing matter now more than ever. And in times when home becomes the entirety of each person's world, we also need to acknowledge that it as a prime factor for socialization. It shouldn't only be the likest of this generation who have the chance to create theirs, independent generation, you get. And as the age group under 30 has already been highly affected by the negative measures of the recent years, including the economic and the social repercussions of the newest crisis, exhibit the effects of a lacking youth tailored housing strategies, which is creates an increased overburden of housing cost, discrimination by landlords. It leaves in many young adults not only vulnerable to the insecurity living arrangement, but at a higher risk of poverty overall, you get. So in this podcast, we actually gonna be discussing the whole issue of the youth living independently. And living independently requires you to have a job, it requires you to have a house, a home, actually, first, because you need a shelter to actually continue with doing other economic activities, other employment activities. So you first need a shelter. So we're gonna actually be discussing all the transition to adulthood and all the issues surrounding the youth in seeking for a comfortable or for an affordable home in the meantime, as as you know, it's the beginning of a new life, or a new journey in the or adulthood, the stage of adulthood. So we're actually gonna be talking about the experiences of the youth. So we're gonna have students who my guests are gonna be students who actually are about to complete their studies like me, and we are going to be talking everything employment, economics, and the situation of housing amongst the youth, of apartments or flats, nice flats or apartments that we need, or as the current generation, and also in an urban context, but we're also gonna be bringing it in a rural context. The reason of doing this is because of I myself, the host of this podcast, has transitioned from living in an urban area to, living in a rural area to now an urban area. So it's it's been a quite a journey. Yeah.